Everyone, and welcome to Module 15, the last module of the course. For your materials for the week, you have some freedom in choosing materials that are areas of interest for you and sharing them with the class. And for this, I'm just going to do a really short talk today, and we're just going to review the learning objectives and outcomes from the beginning of the course, and then we're going to review some major themes from the course, just to kind of wrap everything up. So for the learning objectives and the learning outcomes, there's a lot of kind of parallelism between the two sets, but I just copied and pasted them directly from your syllabus. So now that I've gone through the course once, I would probably do some things differently, but I just wanted to look at them as they were in our syllabus. So first we have describe the food system process from primary food production to consumer consumption. And we looked at really this whole pathway and specific issues within the pathway. So we looked at agriculture or actual food production. We examined animal food production. We examined manufacturing, distribution, consumption, especially in the hospital setting. And we also looked at food waste. So actually that's past the consumer consumption. So we did look at or examine issues all along the food system. Describe key challenges in food systems that impact human health. So we examined some very specific issues such as pesticides or genetically modified organisms, and examined what the literature tells us about how these impact human health. But we also went kind of beyond these biochemical issues and looked at broader issues in the food system, such as social justice of food system workers all along the kind of pathway of the food system, and their experiences as far as health and rights. The next objective was to obtain a working, and I just want to go back to and say key challenges in the food systems that impact human health. We also looked at policy, which is, kind of the governing body under which we're all working and trying to eat the healthiest and most affordable diet possible. So I say that would be another key challenge that we examined that impacts human health. So the next objective was to obtain a working knowledge of controversial topics in food production in order to objectively address client-patient concerns. So hopefully we touched on many topics that you either already hear about in practice or that you will hear about in practice in the future. I think a few of the topics that I heard people hear about a lot in their practice is people want to know about organics, and if they're really healthier. People want to know about eating meat or different kinds of diets. And I think increasingly people do want to know about where their food comes from. So hopefully these were, and I guess the health ramifications of food traveling over such long distances. And we also looked at food processing, which I think is a big client-patient concern. How do we deal with all of these added ingredients, and are these added ingredients of concern? The next objective was to review and critically analyze academic literature in order to determine impact of food system aspects and impact on human health. So that would be your review paper. Identify positive examples of food system management. So hopefully, I tried really hard to provide positive examples in each of the module, and hopefully that came through. So we can see throughout the food system that there are really individuals who are very progressive, making huge steps towards sustainability. So we saw that in the Joel Salatin clip, where he is a farmer that's trying to farm a different way. We saw it in schools and in hospitals where food service managers were employing really innovative techniques to decrease environmental impact. Um, so I think a key message is that, when these topics seem overwhelming, and they are, we have to realize that there are so many people who are vested in this. And even though we may not hear about them on a regular basis, they're there. So there's a really huge movement in this direction. Um, and there's already amazing things being done. So if you're interested in making positive changes, I mean, you really can just kind of look and see what's already happening and have a model for that. The last learning objective was to understand the role of the nutrition professional in environmental nutrition. And hopefully we got at this objective through many of our discussion boards. The second question on many of the discussion boards was usually related right to nutrition practice and asking what have your experiences been and what would you do in certain situations, and also how do the topics that we're considering apply to the real world. And the next one is learning outcomes. So as I said, a lot of these will mirror the objectives. By the end of this course, students will be able to understand the food system, including food production, processing, manufacturing, distribution, and waste. So we did examine many topics within this food pathway, but on the discussion board today, one of the last question asks if there were topics that you thought weren't necessarily that important to you or applicable to the nutrition setting, and also what topics didn't you see that you would want to see, and which ones did you like and think were applicable. So I think that's we're always evolving and trying to make things better. So I'm really interested in your feedback on that. The next learning outcome is to identify key issues in food systems that impact the environment and human health. And I think we've talked a lot about, we talked about key issues, but also the fact that these key issues are all interrelated and create what we know as this humongous food system that spans the entire globe and impacts every single human being, nearly every single human being. Every single human being. I was trying to think of exceptions, but I couldn't think of any because we're all living in the same climate, so all of us are going to feel the ramifications. So we do look at specific issues such as, let's for an example, pesticide application. But then when we're talking about pesticide application, this leads into conversations about water quality, air quality, soil fertility, and then of course the actual biochemical impact of pesticides on human health. So so these are kind of smaller key issues, but they grow and grow and grow and are interrelated within the kind of bigger picture. The next learning outcome was to review, critically analyze, and write a scientific review of a pertinent topic in environmental nutrition, so that you've done that. Understand the impact of public policy on food production and methods of addressing concerns. So I think we really did touch pretty strongly on the first part by discussing the Farm Bill kind of at different points throughout the semester, but especially in our policy module, and just kind of understanding how the policies that we abide by really impact how our day-to-day looks and what access we have to what kinds of food. So I think we really did do a good job touching on that one, but also methods of addressing concerns. I think we could do better on that, and again, I'd be interested in your suggestions. I definitely thought of doing a more applicable assignment where we would actually write to legislators, but I think the challenge of this is that, there's not often active bills that are kind of coming up about maybe specific environmental nutrition issues, or at least not too many. Our major one, of course, is the Farm Bill, and that was revised in 2014. But I think we do need to think about grassroots advocacy for improving the um, general health of our environment and therefore ourselves. And so I do think that we could have improved on understanding how we can address our concerns about these issues. And the last outcome was apply environmental nutrition topics to nutrition practice. And again, I think hopefully we did that nearly every week, considered certain situations that related to our topic of discussion that week. So next I want to discuss some of the major themes of this course, just to wrap up. So the first theme was the food that we eat can impact our health through means other than micro or macronutrients. And I think that's what this course is all about. That's what environmental nutrition is about. The fact that health of a food goes beyond the micro and macronutrients. And that can be in a couple of different ways. So it can be through actual compounds or chemicals or something that are on the food, such as a pesticide, or the other types of composition, such as a GMO. But it can also, or it could be antibiotic resistant bacteria. So it can be something that's biological, but it can also be kind of bigger than that. So if we think about our social justice discussions throughout the semester and the module that's focused particularly on social justice, we can see that that really how our food system functions does impact health in ways other than what the composition of the food that we're eating is on this end. It affects many people and the environment throughout the entire process of getting the food onto our plate. Okay, the next theme is, while some environmental nutrition recommendations are concordant with those in traditional nutrition, others may be discordant. And I will let you make your opinion about just how concordant or discordant they are. I think they're mostly concordant, to be honest, because I think we saw in it pulled together in the module about sustainable diets that there really is a lot of effort to understand the best balance between nutritional health and environmental sustainability. And a lot of times there's a lot of overlap in that, but not exclusively. We also saw patterns that we would say, maybe sweets or baked goods are don't have that big of an environmental impact, but we're still not going to recommend them to clients because it's not good for their nutritional health. So that's just kind of one example. And I think some of them are straightforward, and there's debate among other recommendations. So I think probably the glaring one throughout this entire course was meat consumption. Many of nutrition professionals believe that meat is extremely healthy food, and it's very healthy for you to be consuming it on a regular basis, and even more so that meat may be necessary for proper growth, especially at certain life stages. But others, of course, think that the most healthy way to approach a diet would be vegan or vegetarianism. So I think there's some kind of discordance depending on what you believe as a nutrition professional. The next theme is that while many environmental nutrition topics are considered controversial, others are not. So I would say probably one of the most controversial would be the genetically modified organisms, in which there are staunch supporters on either side of the argument or either side of the debate that are experts in their field and have studied this topic for an entire professional career, and still there's a lot of controversy. On the other hand, we discussed some topics on the other end of the spectrum, like food waste, where I think there's a real general consensus that we want to change this practice. We want to for food to go to people who need it rather than be wasted, and we don't want to waste all of the energy that went into producing the food um, up until the point that it was wasted. And then I think we talked about a lot of topics across the spectrum of whether it is controversial or highly debated, and there's general consensus. Um, how can we come together to address common goals? And I think that it really is the key message that, we may have very divergent perspectives on some of the topics that we've talked about, but others are not controversial and we can agree. So I think it's really these common goals that we need to come together on and recognize that let's move forward in a way that all of us think is the best way to move forward, but let's do something. Let's not be paralyzed because of divergent perspectives in some areas. Um, Another theme at the bottom of the slide here, environmental nutrition topics are extremely difficult to study due to the magnitude and complexity of practices, uncertainty regarding potential health outcomes and unintended consequences, and extreme heterogeneity between populations, locations, etc. So this first part here, the magnitude and complexity of the practices, I think this is an issue that we encounter in nutrition research all the time. This isn't, these aren't, I mean, in vitro studies are extremely important and they have been invaluable in progressing science. And you can control that. You can control that environment usually. But when we're looking at how people eat, when we're looking at policy, there are just so many confounding variables that it makes it really difficult to sort out cause and effect of a specific cause and tying it to a specific effect. So that's just a very difficult type of relationship to identify. Another reason that these topics are difficult to study is because we often don't know the outcome that we're looking for. So many of these practices are relatively new when we're talking about the scope of human evolution. We've really only been using a lot of these practices in agriculture and food processing, even in the last 100 years. And so that's really a pretty short time to be, and really, we've been studying them even shorter time, 20 years, 30 years, 10 years. And so we don't really know what to expect. We don't really know what we're looking for. So it makes it hard to study. And we have extreme heterogeneity between populations, locations, etc. So if we're studying something like agriculture and we're trying to study it within the context of the globe and global agriculture, because we have a global food system, this is just a very tall order to try to determine any really conclusive findings. And for these reasons, a lot of environmental nutrition findings, or environmental science findings, I should say, are based on modeling. They're based on taking what we know right now and putting them into a theoretical situation to see what these theoretical outcomes would be. And this is such a wonderful method in a way, and in another way, it didn't actually happen. We don't actually know how these things are going to go, and this ties back to the magnitude and complexity of the practices. In a model, we can only account for so many confounding variables, and beyond that, we just don't have enough information. So these are just very difficult topics to investigate. Another theme was that the negative health impacts of unsustainable food practices are not shared equally across populations. And I think this was evident throughout the course, but particularly in the social justice module, where the authors of our materials discussed that it really is, well, first, that the health impacts are not shared equally across populations. So we know that they're felt more in vulnerable populations, such as children. We know that they're felt more by women who typically have fewer rights or resources in order to be resilient in these unsustainable situations. And we also see that people of color are usually more heavily impacted. We also know that those who are incurring the most cost to our environment are not the same populations as those who are experiencing the ramifications. So I think one of the more powerful figures I thought from this course was kind of this double map where on one side the map was proportioned, the countries were proportioned according to their greenhouse gas emissions. So we had countries such as the United States or China that were just huge on this map, and then countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, that had a really tiny environmental impact or greenhouse gas emissions. And then the second map was those who would be the most impacted by climate change. And it was really opposite. And the reason that the authors gave was because, those of us who are emitting the most greenhouse gas emissions are from more affluent places. We have more resources to help us cope with changes to the environment and to help us innovate new methods of dealing with new situations. The next theme was that major health organizations, such as the USDA, recognize the lack of sustainability in our food system and have implemented strategic planning to address this issue. So I think when we hear about environmental sustainability, it's easy to think that this is a fringe issue. This is kind of a luxury to be able to consider the environmental impact of certain practices. Or, we think about maybe the types of people that may be environmental advocates, and, maybe we don't identify with those groups. But the truth of the matter is, we saw in the climate change talks in Paris, we've seen through many materials from these major organizations, we can see even through something as, mainstream as the Farm Bill, that major organizations recognize that we are not implementing sustainable practices, particularly in our food system, but also outside of our food system, and that we can't keep going like this forever. And beyond that, we are also going to have to clean up the mess that we've already made. So I think it's, again, I would encourage you to not think of these as fringe issues, but to recognize that our governing bodies are recognizing that this is a major concern that we need to address as well. And in that vein, are doing some really wonderful things in order to improve our food system. We see throughout the country that the number of farm to school programs have just skyrocketed. We see in the Farm Bill that there's more support for sustainable practices and more research into sustainable practices. So it's unfortunate that it's become such a big problem that we have to address this on a national level, but the good news is that now we can move forward. Another theme is that there are many nutrition professionals who are concerned about environmental nutrition issues and taking steps towards sustainability. So if you are a registered dietitian or if you are a member of the Academy, there's the wonderful Hunger and Environmental Nutrition practice group, which I would highly recommend, and just a lot of nutrition professionals who are really invested in these issues and doing some really neat things out in our communities and with patients and clients. So if you are, again, when we talked about food service, but also in just nutrition counseling or in your hospital policies. If you're looking for positive examples, a lot of times they are out there. So it's worth kind of putting out an ear, putting out an eye, and seeing what people are already doing and what's working for them and what's not. So I think the overarching theme of this course is that there are no easy answers. We know as nutrition professionals that behavior change is not easy. And in order to adhere to sustainable practices, we're talking about more than behavior change. We're talking about, changing the entire food system. So this is not easy because we are where we are. And I think because there is controversy in some of these topics, that's okay. We know these are not easy problems, so there's not going to be any easy answers. But there are people who are making steps forward and trying to figure this out. So I had a wonderful time during this course. I learned so much from all of you. I really appreciate those of you who shared your experiences personally and professionally. And I just really enjoyed all of our discussions and looking at all of your work. So hopefully you have found this to be a rewarding class, and you will be getting student evaluations to fill out about this course, and I highly encourage you to do so. This is the first time that we've offered this course, so we really want feedback about how valuable it was for students moving forward, so that we know how we should do this course moving forward. So thank you all for all of your effort, and if you ever want to talk about any of these issues or have questions, feel free to contact me. Thanks. Bye.